We're turning now to our top story, the latest developments in Ukraine. To discuss, I'm joined by Roland, Freudenstein, co-founder of Brussels Freedom House. Good evening, sir. Delighted to have you with us.
Good evening, thanks, and great to talk to you.
So both Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelenskyy spoke separately with Donald Trump on July 4th, with Zelenskyy later saying there is a real prospect of putting an end to this war and America's resolve is decisive. So what is the significance of these calls?
First of all, Zelenskyy is trying to remain in a positive position as seen from Donald Trump. And Zelenskyy is certainly building on recent military successes of Ukraine in the drone warfare with deep strikes in Russia. And he knows Trump likes winners, and or at least he respects winners. I don't know whether Trump likes Zelenskyy already, but he certainly respects him more than a year ago. So Zelenskyy is trying to build on that, and he's trying to show to Trump, but also to the rest of the world, that he's ready for peace if Putin only creates the conditions and shows some kind of readiness to actually negotiate something instead of making demands that are completely unrealistic. So I think that's the rationale behind the call, besides, of course, congratulating the US president on the 250th Independence Day.
Now, a NATO summit kicks off in just 2 days on Tuesday in Ankara. The last two summits produced landmark commitments, including the 5% spending target agreed in The Hague. So what shall we be on a lookout for this time?
Well, I think the buzzword in this Ankara summit of NATO is going to be damage limitation. That's what the Europeans are aiming at. They know Trump is mad at them. You know, he was mad at them a year ago because of defense spending. Europeans adjusted defense spending. But, you know, then came the threats, territorial threats against Denmark, a staunch ally of the United States. The Europeans managed to deflect that, at least for the time being, through unity and some counter threats on trade. But then came the Iran war by Israel and the United States, and new rage from the White House, rage in tweets by the US president about European allies being not helpful, you know, as if this had anything to do with NATO. You know, I mean, if you remember the Iraq war of 2003 and following, where some Europeans steadfastly refused to participate, there was no consequence for NATO at the time. That was a completely separate question because NATO is a defensive alliance. So what I want to say here is you look at Trump's complaints on defense spending, on Greenland, on Iran, and you find that whatever the Europeans do, there will always be something for Trump to complain about. And they hope to minimize this at the Ankara summit. But if you look at the tweets from the White House of the last couple of days, it doesn't look promising.
Right. Roland, let's turn to the battlefield for the moment, if you don't mind. So over the past month, Ukrainian forces say they have hit 8 Russian oil refineries. Last night, Ukraine also launched a major drone attack on St. Petersburg, targeting the city's oil terminal. So how effective is this campaign? Is it, in fact, increasing pressure on the Kremlin?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm not sure if this will drive Putin to the negotiating table, and which means driving Putin to make actual serious compromise and renege on his long-standing demand for the whole of Donbass, which he doesn't even control militarily at the moment. But one thing we know for sure: the Kremlin, Putin, is in a very, very bad place, probably in the worst position, even domestically speaking, since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Ukraine achieving something with the strikes. We see lines of cars for gasoline across most of Russia. Crimea pretty much cut off, not completely, but with a large decrease in deliveries to Crimea. You know, summer tourism curbed or reduced to zero in this summer. So all this indicates that the Kremlin is in a very, very difficult situation. And whether this is going to have a direct effect on Putin's readiness to negotiate, we still have to see. But the chances certainly are there. And if anything can drive Putin to become more flexible in his negotiating position, it is precisely increasing the pressure on the Kremlin with actions like Ukraine is doing with deep strikes against Russia's energy infrastructure.
Now, what's happening on the ground, specifically around Konstantinivka? Because on Friday, Russia said its forces had taken control of the village. Ukraine disputes that claim. So what can you tell us about the situation there?
I haven't been there. So, in fact, I think very few Western observers would claim that they even know exactly what is going on. We have Russia's claim that they took Konstantinivka. We've got Ukraine's claims that this is not the case, that the situation may be difficult, but Ukrainian forces still control the city as a whole. And what we certainly have is what you just see in the picture now is Russians holding up Russian flags in certain parts of Konstantinivka, but these are small teams of soldiers that have penetrated into a city, which is always easier than doing something in an open field. But these small teams of soldiers are easily withdrawn to or driven out by Ukrainian forces. So honestly, if you ask me, I think the situation in Konstantinivka resembles that in Pokrovsk a couple of months ago, where we also had a situation where Russia claimed total control. Ukraine denied that. Definitely, there was an increase in Russian military action in the city center. But even today, there are still counterattacks in and around Pokrovsk. And I think we're going to see something very similar in Konstantinivka, where Ukraine is trying to inflict as high losses as possible on the Russian attacking forces. In the end, withdrawing the largest part of their own forces, but then counterattacking and trying to make life hard for those Russians that actually managed to proceed. So that Konstantinivka, from what I understand, is not that much of a strategic town, and the fortress belt, as it's called, with the two cities of Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, north of Konstantinivka, is still firmly in Ukrainian hands. I mean, the Russians, again, they have moved closer to those cities, but those two cities are firmly in Ukrainian hands. They're well defended. The fortifications are well constructed, and there is no immediate perspective of them falling anytime soon. So that, frankly speaking, the strategic situation is not changed that much by whatever is happening in Konstantinivka.
Now, on a different note, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk recently responded to reports citing U.S. intelligence that Russia may be preparing an armed provocation in Poland to test NATO's resolve. So how seriously should such warnings be taken? And what would Moscow hope to achieve through this kind of hybrid escalation?
Well, let me start with the last point. Putin certainly has an interest in making the West guess what Russia might do next in terms of armed action. And this includes hybrid attacks, such as drone attacks that are then labeled as errors or, erroneously guided drones. There will be more sabotage. There might even be something like a false flag operation, maybe by Belarusian forces. I mean, I'm talking about the ideas that the Kremlin has and that are evidently circulating in Russian military circles, where, of course, US intelligence picks it up and they pass it on to their allies in Poland and elsewhere. So, this is all we can say at the moment, that of course the Kremlin is thinking about this. The Kremlin is calculating what would be the cost, what would be the benefits of such a broad range of aggressive actions. But nobody can predict with any certainty that this is going to happen in the next couple of months. But honestly, I totally understand Prime Minister Donald Tusk in saying, better safe than sorry, and better prepare for it than it doesn't happen, than having something like this happen and be unprepared, psychologically, technically, militarily prepared.
Before we wrap up, I'd like to turn to Poland-Ukraine relations for a moment. There appears to be a renewed political will on both sides to improve ties, with Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha visiting Warsaw on Friday. Now, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk says he's received what he called positive signals, but is waiting for Kyiv to make the first move to ease tensions. So how do you see this developing from here?
Okay, fingers crossed, honestly. This conflict is so unnecessary and damaging. Putin must be popping the champagne bottles one after the other in looking at this Polish-Ukrainian conflict. And look, mistakes were made on both sides. All I can say about the conflict itself is, let's all be a bit more realistic and put history in its place. Poles and Ukrainians, or most Poles and most Ukrainians, will never agree on one common vision of the past. By the way, that also goes for other nations. So instead of trying to punish the other side for saying something or not saying something else, I think we should prioritize much more clearly and say, look, there are geopolitical and freedom-based political imperatives for both countries, Poland and Ukraine, that absolutely dictate close partnership and cooperation. And we can disagree about history till we're blue in the face, but let's not get that in the way of our close security relationship. And that goes for other partners in NATO as well. So I hope that this is now around the corner between Poland and Ukraine, and that leaders will take a step down the escalation ladder and actually start thinking constructively. And as I said, put history in its place.
And that is a great conclusion to our talk. Roland Freudenstein, thank you so very much for joining us tonight. Much appreciated.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for watching World News Tonight. Please stay tuned for more here on TVP World.